joined in studio by Frank Dunlop on the occasion of the publication of his book called Yes, Taoiseach, Irish Politics from Behind Closed Doors. I'm joined in studio by Frank Dunlop this morning. I suppose, in a way, that you could say about Frank Dunlop that he was successful in his career. He was successful as a press secretary, he was successful as a lobbyist, he was successful financially, he was successful as a broadcaster. And then there is a moment that one remembers, which was the night that Fergus Flood asked Frank Dunlop to go home and consider his position. And he came in the following day to the Flood Tribunal, and he gave information to the Flood Tribunal that, as it were, set everybody back on their heels. And for some, confirmed what they had always believed, and for others, genuinely shocked. And clearly shocked Frank Dunlop himself, because I remember seeing the images on television of him coming out of the tribunal looking not in great nick. Frank Dunlop, good morning to you.
Morning, Marian.
How are you?
Very well, thanks very much.
Do you remember that as a key, crucial...
I remember Justice Flood saying towards the end of the day, he didn't turn to me and say, Mr. Dunlop, will you go home and do X, Y, and Z? He said, perhaps the witness might reflect overnight, was the phrase that he used. From that moment on, it didn't take me very long to reflect, to be honest with you. It didn't take, within half an hour later, I had virtually made up my mind what I was going to do. But from that point on, the whole trauma, the whole experience, I don't have a very great recollection of it. I didn't hear very much of what went on. I didn't see very much of what was in the newspapers or on television. Sheila, my wife, kept a fairly accurate record of everything and tells me from time to time who said what and when. But it's a sort of a dark blank period there. I know it's only 4.5 years ago, but physically and mentally, I think physically people can make up their own minds. I think they saw, as you said yourself in your introduction, they saw the photographs, and those who were close to me, family and neighbours and friends, were a little bit shocked. I think I lost 2.5 stone or something like that very quickly.
Tell me a little bit about that, Frank. You had been, I should give out the number, it's 1857 15 105, or marian@rt.ie is the email number. Because you had, in many ways, publicly, not always privately, but publicly, had a charmed life in terms of career, success and money.
Yes.
There were rumours around all the time about what was going on down in the pub. But were you scared witless? Did you see it all running away from you at that point?
No, I was never scared. I think I had been in a witness box once before, years and years ago, when I was fined for speeding. When speeding was the normal fact of life, but I just happened to be caught 25 years ago. A very interesting story, which I won't go into now, but it turned out that the district justice who was on the bench happened to be my wife's uncle, but I was going with Sheila at the time, and I didn't know that it was, that the man on the bench turned out to be Sheila's uncle, and he kept saying
that could be the basis of another.
He kept saying to me, you were speeding to a hospital or something, were you? And I said, no, actually I wasn't, and he fined me £10 or something like that. But I was never in a witness box before in my life, and it's a fairly daunting experience, especially in the circumstances where you are answering very specific questions about specific items and specific amounts of money, tracking, what did you do with this amount of money, what did you write that check for, where did this amount of cash go, all of that. So it wasn't frightening. I never felt frightened, but I don't have a rational explanation for the effect that it had on me physically and mentally for a period. I hasten to say that, and you can make your own judgment looking at me to see that I'm healthy as a trout, and can talk. I cannot talk about the substantive matters, obviously.
I understand that.
But the effect on me and on my family, and Sheila and Sinead, my wife and my daughter, and my mother and brothers and sisters and Sheila's family. Everybody was extremely supportive, and in a funny way, understanding, and there was an awful lot of people, as time moved on, an awful lot of people who, stopped me in the street and said, look, keep going, you're doing the right thing, which is a bit encouraging. As you know, when you're in the public eye, now I had been in the public eye, I was on television, my photograph had been in the papers, everybody I knew I worked with Jack Lynch, everybody knew I worked with Charlie Haughey, so there wasn't an identification issue. If my name had been Finucane or Murphy or something, I don't think it would have had the same impact. The fact that my name is Dunlop, which is a relatively unusual name as it is, everybody went Frank Dunlop.
And the fact that you'd been government press secretary.
And the fact that I'd been government press secretary. And the fact that the whole journalistic community knew of the access that I had. I mean, I was long gone from active politics. I left the civil service in 1986. But, it's like a magnet. You get drawn back time and time again. Whether it's at general election time, or there's a crisis of some sort, or in the business that I was conducting, I started lobbying. And in fact, it's now such a everybody is a lobbyist. You're a lobbyist. I'm a lobbyist. The whole community.
How am I a lobbyist?
Well, you're a lobbyist because you have a view. You have a view about things. You might express your view about what a piece of legislation or a decision or an announcement that has been made by the government. And politicians listen to these things. Politicians, I want to be very careful here now, politicians never actually lead. Very
well,
rarely.
you're not very careful about that. You make it perfectly clear that they never, ever lead.
Very rarely do you get a scenario where the politician leads. The politician is a great weather vane of the public opinion, and they decide, look, this is the way the public, this is what the public want us to do. It's a bit like the Duke of York. Where are my people so that I can follow them? Where are my men so that I can follow them? But I've strayed a little bit from the original question that you were asking about. Was I frightened? No, I don't think I was frightened. I found the prospect daunting. I knew the minute that I went back in and said, I am going to open this can of worms. I knew what that entailed. I knew that there was going to be absolute mayhem, not only for myself but for lots of others. I knew that I would probably be ostracized. I knew that there would be dreadful things said. And in fact, I was more concerned about the effect that all of that would have on my immediate family than it would have on me. After all, I had been in politics, and you have to have a hard neck when you're in politics.
You were quoted, I think, by Frank MacDonald at one stage saying, after this, it was the system. I just worked it. I didn't invent it.
Yeah, well, I use that phrase actually in the tribunal itself. I was confronted by this system. I didn't invent it. I don't know who invented it, but the system existed. I used the system.
Can I ask you a question? Looking at the sums of money that were given to people, they were cheaply bought, weren't they?
I think that's a point that Frank MacDonald made himself, rather controversially on one occasion. I can't exactly remember what the story was. It was long before the tribunal began, and it was perfectly obvious to anybody that people in the building industry and building houses, and not only houses but industry and all the rest of it, were making considerable sums of money. And that if you contrasted that, and he wasn't making an allegation, he was saying it is well known. He had no proof at the time. Nobody had any proof that you could virtually go down to any of the pubs or hotels in or around where the councillors were meeting, and for the price of a pint.
Now, just extraordinary. Because I mean, if you think about it, separate to what you say was the system, and you kind of put yourself in a little bubble, and you think that somebody would put their name, their reputation, their integrity at risk for paltry sums.
Yes. You see, a
Why?
lot, but you see, a lot of things. Again, it's very difficult to explain the actual circumstances as they occur in individual decisions. But people must remember that up until recently, and still is the case, but even better now than it used to be, elected councillors have jobs. they're part-time politicians. They may be teachers. They may be builders themselves. They may be doing anything. They may have a job. And sometimes it was extraordinarily difficult to get people to attend meetings, to actually come to meetings because of job commitments, even though they had been elected as a councillor to fulfill a representational function, and the representational function on behalf of their constituents. Really, we have a mental picture of what a local councillor does. He looks after, the water supply. If something goes wrong, you get onto your local councillor or whatever. But there are distinct functions that councillors do, and one of them, everybody confuses this. One of them is zoning. Everybody talks about planning. Planning
it's
actually,
zoning
it's
that matters.
Zoning that matters. Planning,
mind you. Planning matters too.
Planning matters as well. I mean, you could have land zoned for quite a significant time and not get planning on it. And a large part of the criticism from the official side of the fence was that councillors were zoning land that was inappropriate or that had no services, or that you can zone it if you wish, councillor, but it's going to take 5-10 years before we get around to servicing the land, so it's not going to be any use to anybody, so we're not going to give planning permission on it even though it's zoned.
Right, yeah, but if you have it zoned, there's a honeypot down the end of the road.
If you have it zoned, you know that at some stage, at that time, yes, there was a honeypot. Now, under the new Planning Act that was introduced, I think, 2 or 3 years ago, there's a defined period in which you have to act. You have to do something if you get your land zoned.
When you did spill the beans, what was the reaction from those on whom the beans had been spilled?
Well, there were various reactions. Everything. I remember one time reading a book about Harold Macmillan, and if you recall, Harold was, British Prime Minister, and he had a prostate operation, and suddenly decided that, well, look, I'm not going to be able to continue anymore. And the men in the grey suits in the Conservative Party said, yeah, that's fine, yeah, and they elected Alec Douglas Hume, or Lord Hume as he was, as his successor. But he said he knew that he was no longer in charge when he was lying in his hospital bed and there was a knock on the door. And this man appeared in a boiler suit, and he said, "Excuse me, sir, I'm from the post office," and he removed his scrambler telephone. And that's when Harold Macmillan said he knew that was it. It was finished then. When the phone stops ringing, that's when you know. Now, there were 1 or 2 calls in the immediate aftermath, and attempts at calls in the immediate. After that, nothing. As if a steel door just came down. Now, you get all sorts of messages delivered to you, and third party, fourth party, and all the rest of it. But there was just absolute, total silence. Now, I don't want to suggest that is only happened in the political world. In the business world, I had a client portfolio which was, I don't mean to suggest, I don't want to be immodest about it, but I mean, people might have looked with a little bit of envy at it. When this happened, within 4 months, that client list disappeared.
What did they do? Dear Frank, we would...
Dear Frank, some of them were very, very straightforward and businesslike, and rang up and said, look, Frank, in view of what has happened, we don't think it's in our best interests, and I'm sure you appreciate this, and look, we'll send you the check for whatever period you've been working for us, for the month. And a lot of them were contractual, so they had contractual obligations, so they had to fulfill those contractual obligations. But they just said, that was the best way of doing it.
Right, 100% gone.
100% gone.
Business gone.
Business gone.
And because I want to talk to you a little bit about your own family. You'd had a big loss in your family just prior to that as well, which I'll come to after the break. But I want to go to some of our callers first. From Donegal, Michael thinks a disgrace to have Frank Dunlop on the radio this morning. This is a man who, in his own words at the tribunal, said that he had, quote, he had participated in bribing elected representatives, unquote. To be giving a man like that airtime is a complete misuse of the public funds that are given to RTE. He is disgusted. Kevin says, does Frank feel guilty that people like Kevin, who had to take out large mortgages because Mr. Dunlop bribed councillors, which increased his mortgage substantially? Kevin said he's still left paying the price. Damien says, Damien asked Frank Dunlop to give his views on why nobody has gone to jail for the crimes of corruption that were committed in the planning area.
Well, in answer to particularly to Kevin, I find that Kevin's comment a little bit ironic, because the actual position is, or was at the time, that the officials in the various councils, at one council as it was, Dublin County Council, it's now divided up into 3. the criticism was that they weren't zoning land, and therefore they were causing a glut on the market. In other words, people couldn't get houses, they couldn't buy houses, and the houses weren't available. Now we have a scenario where no matter who it is or where it is, it appears to me anyway, I'm no longer involved in the business, but if you look at the property pages of the newspapers, you see an announcement that houses have been sold off plans before even a brick is put on top of a brick, or a block on top of a block. It is literally amazing. But any decision in relation to that had nothing whatsoever to do with mortgages or increasing mortgages.
Well, the cost of land has to do with mortgages.
Well, you see, the cost of land, obviously, in those days, people had land banks. They bought land banks 10 years previous, 5 years previous, or whatever. Very, very clever people decided that from a demographic point of view, either that the population was increasing or that there will always be a demand for houses, and they bought land in strategic locations and said, look, at some future date, we're builders, and we're going to use this land.
I fully understand that.
But then you come along, when they buy the land, and then the houses are sold, and enormous profits are made. That's what the cause of the mortgages.
That's right. But also, Frank, come on. If one buys land outside a town or outside a city or whatever, strategically, as you say, you then strategically have to go about getting it reasonable.
Oh, absolutely. Oh, gosh.
Which is
no, I wouldn't know that. It'd be disingenuous to even suggest otherwise. Yeah.
Marianne says, even though the tribunal is still running, the same culture still exists in planning. Nothing changes in spite of the tribunal. What would you say to that?
Well, obviously, I don't know. I mean, you asked me earlier on before the break there, what happened. I told you what happened, that within a very short period, my client portfolio was gone. I would say that if I made a call to a politician to know, could I come in and see him, sometimes I didn't even make the call. I would arrive in and I'd say they would run a mile. So I don't know what's going on.
Right.
People can exercise their own judgment.
You figure it was?
Yes.
All over?
Oh, yes.
All over?
Yes, I do.
All
but
over.
I have no evidence or proof to that effect. But, I mean, you talk about the culture of the times, and I know that's an easy phrase, and I know maybe in some instances it's a cop-out to talk about the culture of the time, but we do live, as we talk here now today, we're living in a particular time warp and culture. 10 years' time, it could be completely different. It is now completely different today to what it was 10 years ago.
Right.
Can you imagine interviewing somebody 10 years ago, talking about what happened in Dublin County Council in the previous 10 years? Not a chance. Nobody had come on the programme.
That's right. That's right. So in other words, really, these tribunals have provided a service in terms of information.
Well, my view, I mean, obviously I have a particular view because I am involved in the tribunal and it's ongoing, it's progressing. You hear all sorts of comments being made about how long it's taking, how much it's costing, and whatever. That's all perfectly legitimate. Last time I checked, it was a democracy, so people are entitled to their views. The fact of the matter is this process was established, and it's going through its particular motions, and it will come to its particular conclusions, and doubtless it will be written about, although at that stage I suspect there will be so much fatigue, or tribunal fatigue, or tribunalitis in the country that people will say, oh, not again. But the process is continuing.
Yeah. And the system has been revealed for how it worked. When your client list evaporated, you had been at the centre of the action, so to speak, in terms of politics and in terms of business for a very long time. What did you do with yourself?
Initially nothing, absolutely nothing. The main concern at the time was health, to make sure that everything was okay, and that I got tremendous support from all the people around me.
I mean, was it difficult for your wife to go to Mass on Sunday?
No, I don't think so. No, Sheila's not that type of person. And
was it difficult for your daughter?
No, absolutely not. And this is a generational thing as well. Young people have a peripheral interest. I'm not suggesting that they're not interested. They are. But there is a peripheral... There are lots of other more important things going on in young people's lives than, what's happening at tribunals. It's a flashpoint. It flashes across their consciousness, and then they move on.
So
but it wasn't difficult. No, it definitely was
not. Or there wouldn't
difficult.
have been like, there's your daddy in trouble.
No, the only just to say to you, the morning after Justice Flood, I said, perhaps the witness will go away and reflect. I'm not making a major announcement or anything like that on this, but nobody knows except my doctor and Sheila and my daughter Sinead, and that I was in the cardiac unit of the Palmata Private the following morning. Now, thankfully, everything was fine, but nobody knew that. So these things do have an effect. They may not necessarily be as you read in the newspaper or you hear on radio or see on television, but they do have effect. They do have an emotional effect. You'd want to be made of stone.
That's why I was saying to you, were you not scared witless?
No, I wasn't. I don't think I was ever scared, and I think the fact of where I had worked and the people I had worked with and what I had seen and all that, I think that sort of in a way anesthetized me to anything of feeling scared. But no, it didn't affect people like that. The only occasion was, I remember walking down Nassau Street sometime afterwards, about 2 months afterwards, and I was tipping down Nassau Street along the wall there by Trinity College, you know where all the buses park, tourist buses park and all the rest. And I was walking along down there, and you do get an antennae. You have an antennae that, maybe, who are those two guys down there now? And I think I know one of those. And as it turned out, I saw these two men standing by the wall. I don't know who they were. I don't know whether they were bus drivers or whether they were tourists or who they were. And out of the corner of my eye, I knew that they were talking about me because I knew the comment had been made, so I had been recognized. And just as I came abreast of them, one of them spat on the pavement right in front of me, missing the toe cap of my shoe. And he said absolutely nothing. He didn't say anything to me. He didn't say,
you're a holy disgrace.
It's a holy disgrace or anything like that. It takes a little bit of mental courage and stability not to turn around and give somebody a box. I mean, that would be the normal person's instinct. I just kept walking. Because in the event, he could say, look, I'm terribly sorry, I didn't realize you were there, and I was just spitting. He shouldn't have been spitting anyway. But no, it never really affected us in that way. And we got tremendous support from the community around us. I got hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of messages, some of which I was able to reply to. Lots of people wrote, hundreds of people telephoned, hundreds of people
all
called.
All supportive?
Yes, all supportive.
None negative?
No. I think people made up their minds that we're not going to make a judgment about what Frank is involved in or has done or hasn't done or what this process is all about. Our judgment is that we don't like him to see him in the condition that he is, and we're more concerned about that. I think it's probably akin to when somebody gets sick. No matter who gets sick, if somebody gets sick, they say, oh God, I'm terribly sorry to hear that, and look, what can I do? Now, you mightn't particularly want to be stranded on a desert island with the person, but you don't like to hear that somebody is sick, particularly somebody that you know.
Now, you had lost your son how long in advance of that?
Carl died in June of 1998, and the first letter from the tribunal came in October.
And can you tell me a little bit about what happened to him?
Yes, Carl died when he was 16. He had got a melanoma at the back of his eye when he was 11. And I remember the awful Sunday afternoon it was, so when we brought him into the Eye and Ear Hospital, and we were told that he had a melanoma behind his eye, and the only solution was to remove his eye. So they removed his eye and removed the melanoma and gave him a prosthesis. And he was a terrific swimmer. He was involved in the horses, and so he got this prosthesis, and everything was fine. Perfect. He sort of returned to life, as it were, went back to school. There was no problem whatsoever. Back on the horses. We were very careful, obviously, when he was on the horses. But swimming, not a bother. He was on an Irish team that swam for Ireland in Malta, and it was terrific. And then 5 years later, in late January, early February, his swimming coach, said that he noticed that he hadn't the same energy, and perhaps we should, get some blood test done or something like that. Which we did, and Sheila called me from the doctor's surgery and said, the doctor said that Carl has to be brought in immediately, so we brought him to Crumlin, and we were told that it had spread to his liver, and it was downhill after that. We did everything. We brought him to a special clinic in the United States and in Mexico actually, and but it's a terribly salutary thing, as you know, to watch a 16-year-old in particular, full of life, interested in everything to do with sport, to gradually just fade away in front of your eyes. And in all of the things that have happened, tragic and all as Cahill's death was for Sheila and Sinead and myself, and we remember him every single day, and this book is dedicated to him. And he would have a wry grin on his face if he knew that. But it was a tremendous benchmark for us. What worst thing could happen to us? So, I'm here in the eye of the storm, tribunals, a judge telling me to reflect, I reveal all hell breaks loose, the country is collectively throwing brickbats at me, whatever. I don't know what they expected me to do, to shut up or say nothing, or to stonewall. I don't know what they expected me to do, but that is, nothing worse could happen to anybody. So that was a tremendous touchstone. So look, the worst thing that ever happened to us. So this is really of no concern compared to that. It is easy to get very emotional. I remember we were on our own one Saturday. The nurses were changing over, and Sheila and myself were on our own in the house with Cahill on the Saturday before he died. And he took a turn, and we got very frightened because we were on our own. And people do what they normally do. We rang for the doctor and we rang for the priest. And as happens, Murphy's Law, nobody was available. And my own parish priest wasn't available, so I rang the priest in the next parish, and his name was Monsignor Ted Dunn. And I knew him, and he came in. He said, I'll be there in 10 minutes. He came in, and he said, just tell me quickly, and I told him, Cahill is his name, etc., etc. And he went over into the room, and Cahill was there, and he said, hello, Cahill, I'm Father Ted. And he said, spoke to him for 10 minutes, and so we said, thanks very much, Monsignor, and he went out, and we went back into the room, and Cahill opened one eye, and he said, did he say he was Father Ted? Which was an absolutely incredible moment. And then he lived until the following Wednesday morning, and we were told, we called the doctor, and Dr. Michael Burke, the local doctor, and he said, look, you have 10 minutes. And
did he know?
He never said. I suspect that he did, and that he was protecting us, because the nurse, wonderful nurse, Anne McQuaid, that we had, and told us afterwards that on the Sunday night, before he died, that she was sleeping in the room with him, beside him, in a cot beside him, and he said she had settled down for the night, and etc. And he said, Anne, are you there? And she said, yes, Cahill, I am. And he said, Anne, I think I'm going to die. And that was, he never said anything to us, he never spoke to us, but on the Wednesday morning at 9 o'clock, 10 to 9, when Michael Buck said to me, you have 10 minutes, I went into the room and I cradled his head in my left arm, and he died in my arm. And if when you remember things like that, you say, right, okay, everybody takes responsibility for their actions. And I am prepared to take responsibility for I'm not prepared to talk about anybody else. I'm not prepared to take responsibility for anyone else. They can speak for themselves, and have done, and will do. It's my responsibility, and I will take the responsibility, come the consequences, whatever they happen to be. But that experience is the single worst experience that I've ever had.
Right, and presumably put everything else into perspective.
Correct.
It seems to me you have remarkably little respect for the leadership qualities, or any qualities really, of politicians, that you absolutely confirmed everything that we saw in Yes Minister, with the exception of Charlie Hoy, that you really respected and liked Charlie Hoy for his ability to do things, And that other than that, you reckon that even those who arrive at the level of being minister are like babies in the hands of senior civil servants.
Yeah, the government is run by the civil service. To be more accurate and specific, the country is run by the Department of Finance. There is absolutely no question or doubt about it. Everything emanates from the Department of Finance in Marian Street, and for one very simple reason: they control the purse strings.
Right.
They control the money. They control the method by which the money is raised. They bring up the schemes as to how money is, and then they decide how it's to be allocated. And
then they tell the minister.
And then they tell the minister. Now, you do get, on occasion, and I hate using the word ideologue or ideology because it conjures up all sorts of, stupid notions. But you do get strong ministers from time to time who go in and have the notion that I'm the minister, therefore I'm making the decisions. The civil service may go away and have a little giggle to themselves over a cup of coffee, while the minister is up in his very large office, fully carpeted, designed, and lovely furniture, private secretary, loads of staff, loads of equipment and all the rest of it. But the real decisions, policy decisions, have been taken. Now, you do, as I say, get ministers from time to time who come along, strong ministers, and say, look, I accept what you're saying, I know what the finances of the country are, I will not allow X, Y, and Z to happen, or I want X, Y, and Z to happen. Now, whatever. Charlie Haughey was one. He was a very strong minister for finance. Charlie McCreevy is another, who's just departing. To Brussels. Very strong. And one wouldn't normally say that, use the word ideology in the context of Charlie McCreevy.
He wouldn't want you to.
He certainly wouldn't want you to. But he had a view as to how the economy should be run. A very specific view.
Which clearly Bertie Ahern is going to digress from now.
Well, Bertie obviously now has taken a view. I mean, the strands are in the wind, and Inchydonny and all of that, and caring and sharing, and putting a more benign face on things. And the Fianna Fáil people will say, well, we have to do that because of the PDs. They're so right-wing, it's unbelievable.
They're tipping off the
They're
edge.
to the right again, just can't, and now I have a particular view about the PDs. The PDs were founded not out of any ideology or new political thinking. They were founded because they didn't like Charlie Haughey. They wouldn't buy into the fact that Charlie Haughey was the leader of Fianna Fáil. So a bunch of guys who, when they discovered that Charlie Haughey was elected leader democratically, secretly, by secret ballot, and won by 6 votes, they decided collectively to get a fit of pique and throw their rattlers out of the pram.
Tell me about your first confrontation, I should say, with Charlie Haughey.
Well, I had known, as Taoiseach. Well, I had known Charlie for a long time, virtually since the time I became a Fianna Fáil press officer. Charlie was in the wilderness at that time. But Charlie used to drop into my office. Very charming, sophisticated, intelligent, engaging, funny man. And from time to time I went around the country to the rubber chicken circuit with him. Which, well, if you think about it, if you put it into context, here is a man who had been Minister for Finance at the next most senior position to the Taoiseach, fired overnight, 2 o'clock in the morning, and makes a key decision, that he was not going to resign from Fianna Fáil, voted in the Dáil in a motion of confidence in Jim Gibbons, the man who was the witness in the arms trial against him, voted in the motion of confidence, was not going to be thrown out of the Fianna Fáil party, held on to the whip, and then decided, look, and he went around the country talking to perfectly honourable members of the Fianna Fáil party at common level, but people who would never expect to have the Minister for Finance attending a common meeting. They might have a function down in the constituency which would be a fundraiser or something like that, and Charlie did that. We moved on. Then Jack Lynch found himself in the position, and then I find this interesting as well to look back in retrospect, having been involved in it at the time, about leading. The message was quite clear. The Fianna Fáil party, the grassroots, wanted Charlie Haughey back. Forget about what happened in 1970. We want Charlie back. Jack Lynch got the message. brought Charlie back to the
How did you get the message? Was Bill Lucknow?
Oh, no, that was later.
Right.
Yeah, that was later. Yeah, Bill Long, that was later. But he got the message travelling around. I mean, again, this is the process by which politics works, you know. We're the leaders of the party, we tell you what to do. And the guy said, listen, hold on a second, you know, we're attending meetings, we're listening to people, we're talking to people. You're up there in Dublin. You know, we know what's going on the ground. You're a bunch of useless so-and-sos. Why the hell, the only man with any talent, and he's sitting above on the back benches, looking down on top of you, why the hell don't you bring him back and put him on the front bench? And this was what was going on. Fianna Fáil, when it lost office in 73, were totally, completely directionless. They had been in power for 16 years. Everything had been done for them. They had private secretaries, people wrote speeches for them, they wrote briefs for them, they prepared them for interviews, everything was done for them. Suddenly they're thrown out of office. They have none of this support system. They have no civil service. So they have to come up with ideas of their own, policies of their own. And it began to become clear fairly quickly that there was a deficiency.
Right, come back to your meeting with Charlie.
Charlie became Taoiseach in December 1979, and I had a meeting with him minutes afterwards. Literally minutes afterwards, he said, I want you to stay in your job. I said, that's fine. You know the conditions. We work closely together. You tell me, I'll tell you, and then we'll get on like house on fire. Knowing full well, and because I knew Charlie at that stage, that, Charlie was a man of very strong views and opinions, particularly about the media, and I was going to be his channel of communication to the media.
Well, we hate it.
Not hated,
well,
but
anyway,
certainly not loved.
Yeah.
But one morning I was called, told that the Taoiseach wanted to see me, and I went up, and Charlie was sitting at the desk. There was another gentleman in the room, Pádraig Finucane, a wonderful man who was a sort of an eminence grise. I don't mean like using that phrase, but he knew Charlie's moods. He knew how to handle Charlie. And Charlie was sitting at the desk with his head in his hands, and Pádraig was sitting in an armchair in front of the desk, and sort of raised his eyes to heaven and made a signal to me, knowing me as he did, because I would sort of say, what the hell is wrong with you today, or something. Put his finger to his lips and say, listen, don't say anything. But Pádraig said, Taoiseach Frank is here now. And Charlie raised his head out of his hands, and I was a bit shocked, because Charlie was sort of fairly coloured in the face. He was sort of puce in the face, and his hair was a bit, by virtue of the fact that he had his head in his hands, his hair was all ruffled and standing up, and he just said, yeah, where the so-and-so were you yesterday? And I know I'm on national radio, so therefore, I mean, people can fill in the blanks. And knowing him as I did, I tried to be flippant and say, look, we have to diffuse this situation here. There's something funny going on that I'm not clued into. I haven't worked it out yet. So I said, yesterday, yes. Well, yeah, yesterday was Sunday. So at that, Charlie exploded and said, we're making progress here. The bloody fool knows yesterday was Sunday. So I just said, look, I suddenly said, look, sorry. Monday morning, we're not having this. Don't talk to me like that. And I left. He called me back, tried to call me back, but I left. Now, that was Charlie. That took place in a period of what? 2 or 3 minutes. That was Charlie. Charlie would never refer to that incident again. Never. He would never say, I remember the morning he came in, or I apologise, or whatever. And for a whole week, I was in Purda. Every morning at a specific time, about 10:15, my special phone on my desk rang, and that was the summons to a meeting here with the Taoiseach. And we did various things. We might look at things for the day. We might review what had been on RTE in that morning, and what the hell were they doing out there, or what was in the papers, or what are you doing, Frank, or why are you not controlling things, or whatever. But
Silencio,
until the following Monday morning.
And then we carry on as usual.
The following Monday morning, the phone rang, having not rung for a week. And Charlie was on the other end of the phone, and he said, Frank, I was wondering, would you have a minute to spare? I need to consult you about something.
And we carry on. I want to zip through a few of the stories that you tell in the book. You talk about the question of photocopying the Garda report on Ray Burke, and you were asked to do so by the then Minister for Justice.
Yeah, on my office, and my office was directly opposite the Capitol. lots of Lennon, Burke, Sean Doherty, whoever, sometimes popped in and would say hello, or sometimes they'd be popping in to find out, how was the action, what was the mood, how are things today, Frank? Like, are we going to get a bad time at cabinet? Because they would be clicking in to find out how Charlie was looking at things. And this morning, before a cabinet meeting, Sean Doherty and Ray Burke arrived into my office together. Sean said, Frank, I want you to do something for me while we're at cabinet. He had in a large, what we knew in the civil service at the time was a circulation envelope. This is an envelope.
The brown envelope.
A brown envelope.
Right.
A large brown envelope. But with where it would be clear, if you go to the files in the civil service, to be clear who had this file previously, to be written on it, and you had to sign off on it. Say, well, look, I was the last person who had this and dated and all the rest. But there was nothing written on this one. And he said, I want you to photocopy that, and while we'll come out and have it ready for us when we come out. Don't read it, don't show it to anybody else, don't get your secretary to do it yourself.
And you did it.
And he had to be there, and the boys went off, the two Sean Doherty and Ray Burke went off into the cabinet. And normally, at cabinet time, there's a lull, because everybody now is at the cabinet table, and maybe a few calls from the press, people saying what's happening. I went down to the whip's office, down the corridor, where I knew there was a large photocopying machine. And it's very difficult to photocopy something without looking at it, or without reading it.
Did you really?
I looked at it. Oh yeah, I knew very quickly, and I took it out and started.
And this was the Garda investigation into Ray Burke?
And it was done on paper. It was obviously done on a manual typewriter.
Right.
That was pretty obvious. We've got very sophisticated now with all our, laptops and everything like that. But it was obviously done on...
Frank, are you telling me you didn't read it?
Oh, I knew very well. This is a Garda report by Garda so-and-so about an interview that he conducted with Ray Burke. That was obvious. And you turn the pages and... So I didn't read it in full.
Do you regret you didn't get to take two photos?
Well, I'd be totally dishonest if I said I didn't. Of course I regret. I should have kept a copy.
A couple of things when you were during elections. The tracking polls.
Yes.
You made them up.
We did, yes.
They didn't exist.
No.
You told lies.
Yes.
Yeah, you told the media lies.
But political parties always tell lies during election campaigns.
Who knew that you, just to let the listeners know, you were taking a terrible hammering, Fianna Fáil were taking a terrible hammering, to reverse the image. You dreamed up these imaginary tracking polls. You told people that your tracking polls gave a different version of events to the real polls, shall we say. And as everybody asked you, give us a look at the polls, give us a look at the polls, you said you couldn't because they didn't exist. Who knew they didn't exist? Well, who was director of elections at that time?
Yeah, somebody asked me that question yesterday, and I had to sort of rack my brains at the time who the director of election was. Now, I can't remember whether it was Michael Woods or David Andrews. I'm not absolutely certain.
Are you telling me that the director of elections didn't come into you and say, Frank, give us a look at those polls?
No, it did not. No. You see, what happens... what happens...
Dunlop, listen, your director of elections, this guy is telling you there's good news here, we have it on paper, and I don't go into you and say, listen, I really need to see that.
Yeah, I did not sit down with anybody, any politician at the time and say, listen, we've invented these polls, we're having a terrible problem. People in Fianna Fáil headquarters knew. We were getting telephone calls. We knew what was happening. Hold on now. Let's get real here. We knew that the thing was going down the tubes because people were coming back every night and saying, we've been canvassing out in Fox Rock. There are 2 Mercedes and a BMW, and they're voting Labour.
Did nobody ask you about those polls?
No, nobody asked me about it. The only time we were asked about the polls afterwards was, I remember one specific journalist here in RTE, in the news current affairs area, Pat Farrell, the General Secretary of the Fianna Fáil Party, I met him in the street one day and he said, do you know something, those bloody tracking polls that, we were talking about, this man keeps ringing me every week to know, can I give him copies? What am I going to say? Well, I said, you're just going to have to tell me the truth. At some stage, said, listen, they didn't exist. Because the opinion polls that were being conducted by the newspapers and were being published were disastrous. Right. A morale, it was a subterfuge, a morale boost for the troops. Our tracking polls are showing that things are not as bad as they are. And this goes on all the time.
I have to take my last break. I'm talking to Frank Dunlop, and we're talking about his book, Yes, Please.
1850 715 10.
Welcome back to the programme. Now, Sheila thinks that Frank Dunlop showed great courage when he spilled the beans. People are quick to forget that it is the same political crowd in Frank Dunlop's day that is in government now. Does Frank Dunlop think that he should deserve to go to jail for his actions? This guy Dunlop spoke about having a hard neck. This is presumably a great assistance to him in his self-serving accounts of his dishonest dealings and his failure to proffer to the public a smidgen of apology or remorse. Do you think you might go to jail?
Well, that's for something that, the tribunal will issue a report, somebody else will take it over, make a decision like they're doing it currently with other people. Whatever happens, happens.
I want you to tell me about P. Flynn at the Moulin Rouge. And I want to quote a line in the book where you said P. Flynn had a brain that could comfortably fit into a small fingertip of Desi O'Malley, which is pretty savage stuff.
Yeah, well, I mean, it says a lot about the brain that Desi O'Malley has. I think Desi O'Malley was one of the, from an intellectual point of view, was one, he's no longer involved in politics, was one.
Tell me about P. Flynn at the
People in the Moulin Rouge. We were in Paris. I was lobbying on behalf of a French company who had joined an Irish company in a joint venture. The Department of the Environment had issued a tender for an incinerator in Ireland. And there were 26 applications. It was whittled down to 6. It was whittled down to 3. We were in the last 3. I invited the minister to visit the plant outside Paris in a place called Limay. The French were very hospitable, and they said, would the minister like to?
And the
minister did, and we went off to the place called the Crazy Horse, the Moulin Rouge. You may have been there, others may have been there, they may know what it was, and end of story.
Just finally, and I know this is a savage question to put to you in the space of time we have to, you really say in this book that Jack Lynch is placed on the right hand of God. You think that he knew much more than was ever said about the Armstrong, and you would see him in the halfpenny place by comparison with Charlie Haughey.
Let me put a very specific to you, which I've put. If you accept that Charlie Haughey knew that Sean Doherty was tapping phones, which everybody does because Sean Doherty said it, subsequently, you have to accept that the Taoiseach of the day knows what's going on. So Jack Lynch allegedly was told in December 1969 about certain things happening, but Charlie Haughey wasn't fired until May 1970.
Okay, listen, I'm going to have to go. I'll be murdered. I'll be over time. Are you impressed with Joe Taylor?
Sheila has a great line that when we're short of money, I'll go around doing a one-man show around the country, imitating Joe Taylor, imitating me.
Okay, listen, apologies to the newsroom, I'm late coming to you. This is Frank Dunlop. The book is called Yes, Taoiseach, Irish Politics from Behind Closed Doors. Endless stories in there that people will find interesting, though a lot of people are very cross with Frank, naturally. We'll have all the details of that on the website. Until tomorrow, from all of us here, a very good day to you.